almost more than years. The botanists, they tried to contribute themselves so as to prepare a roadmap for showing the similarities and dissimilarities, and so as to provide a sort of a chart box, which we call it as a classification. Classification is nothing but it is sort of a categorization of what we see around and its memorization. And because of that, classification is one of the important tools to recognize the correct plant, the correct species, and its correlation with others. And because of that, classification is still a very vibrant and vital topic of plant systematics. Almost all the research which is being undertaken in plant taxonomy, it may be in the form of biochemistry, physiology, genetics, histology, embryology, developmental biology, even the modern molecular biology and bioinformatics. All these, they are used as a tool so as to find the closely related genera together, closely related families together, species together, and to pinpoint what is that last living component which we know as a species, which is successful in its reproduction. Now, when we talk about this particular definition is not that simple, because today we see the plants and generally we discuss the plants up to species level. But these species, they are having their own variants. These species, they are having their own cultivars. These species, they are also having their own strains, and also they are interacting through the back-cross, through the self-cross, cross-pollination and self-pollination, mutation and hybridization. And that's where what we know as a species, on one hand, what we define as a stable unit of the living component, it is that way unstable, because this is the unit which is going to give rise to next species, new form of species, alteration of the species, modification of the species, and thus formation of new species. So this is a basic tool which is undergoing the speciation. And because of that, when we talk about the classification, it becomes our duty to see the roadmap, see the path, how this classification came into existence, how different scientists, different taxonomies, different paleontologists, they shared their views, they contributed their knowledge, and with this we have come today. So I will go through now my presentation. You will be seeing this on your screen as usual. So we are talking about, and we are restricting ourselves today only to the classification of angiosperms, because this is the component which has been included in the taxonomy of angiosperms. Or otherwise, you do know well that there is a classification of algae, there is a classification of bryophytes, there is a classification of fungi, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and also the classification within the families, the classification of the genera, and likewise. So the hierarchy may differ. As far as the classification is concerned, today and henceforth, we will be discussing these components. We will be having an overview today In this overview, we will be seeing that how an approach was made towards the classification. And obviously now it is named as artificial classification system, natural classification system, and obviously phylogenetic classification system. So in simple words, we can categorize these classification systems into two components: the pre-Darwinian classification systems, which we are not considering the component of evolution and phylogeny, and classification systems which are proposed after the Darwinism, where the concept of phylogeny and evolution was taken into consideration. Obviously, because of that, the artificial and natural systems of classification, they are the pre-Darwinian classification system because they were proposed before the species plantarum, before the concept of evolution. Whereas in phylogenetic system of classification, which initiated somewhere in 1853, which was involving the component of heredity, the component of interaction with the environment, and obviously the progressive changes which were supposed to take place in the morphology. So obviously it may be morphological in the sense either it may be external or internal morphological changes. And because of that, phylogeny is nothing but it is the interaction of a species with its environment and its modification, which are the changes which have been made permanent. So let's go for the today's component or topic, that is the overview. So as far as the classification systems are concerned, generally there are four groups of classification systems. So if at all we start to study the history of the classification, we are having the artificial system of classification, which initiated somewhere about 300 years before Christ. And this was initiated by the Plato and Theophrastus and many others. Later on, it was a mechanical system of classification, which was following the Theophrastus, but they took into consideration the morphological characters of the plants and the flowers together. But the division or the groups which were made, they were absolutely artificial, and because of that, this was segregated from artificial, and this was called the mechanical system of classification. Obviously, based on many characters together, when the classification systems were proposed, there were many, including the Bessay and many others, and obviously the Engler, Prantl, Decandol, Swiss, and so many. It was called the natural system of classification. It is called as a natural because even though these systems were followed by accepting the traits of the plants, truly the Darwinism concept of the heredity, Darwinian concept of evolution was not taken into consideration, and that's why many of the families or many of the classification systems, they are called as natural. And then after that, obviously you know that these are the classification systems which have been produced in 19th century onwards, which are based on the many characters, interrelated characters, also based on their evolutionary interpretation. And these classification systems, they start beginning and appearing somewhere from 1880 to present day. So Engler, Bessay, Hutchinson, Smith, Cronquist, Takhtajan, and the modern systems of classification. All these, they are included in phylogenetic system of classification. Generally, this mechanical system of classification term is not used now, but we are using only three terms: artificial system of classification, natural system of classification, and phylogenetic system of classification. So the artificial system of classification is based on arbitrary, easily observable characters, that is external characters such as habit, color, number, form, or some features. This system of classification was used by many modes like Theophrastus to Linnaeus, which fits in this category. Now, generally here the people consider, the taxonomists, they consider only one character. Either they consider the habitat, whether they consider only the habit of the plant, they consider only the one or two characters of the plants, and accordingly they made the classification, and that's why it was artificial one. The second system of classification, it uses the overall similarity which is existing within the group. So this group system of classification, artificial system of classification, they are They can be simply defined into two categories by in artificial system, only one or two characters are considered for classification. Whereas in natural system of classification, many characters are concerned, and these characters which are showing the groups, they are interrelated, and the ones which are showing the groups, they are treated together, and that's why this is called the natural system of classification. Now, when we are going for the angiosperms, I am repeatedly telling you this, and you already know, for the sake of convenience, why we are supposed to provide a very efficient classification system. Because today, the angiosperms, even though they are the plants which are producing the flowers, fruits, and seeds, where the seeds are enclosed in the ovary, these angiosperms, they are the largest group today, existing today. It is the most diverse group today. It is most highly evolved group today, and it is most economically important group today. So from all the categories, the angiosperms, they are available around us. They are spread around us. They are having the largest diversity, largest distribution, and they have become part and parcel of the life cycle of the human community. And because of that, we are interested in angiosperms. As far as today's angiospermic position is concerned, we are having almost 68 orders as per the recent classification systems. And at the moment, we have identified almost more than 416 families. So family is nothing but it is a small group of assemblage of similarly related characters or closely related characters together, which are called the families. And they are obviously comprising almost more than 13,164 genera, which are recorded today as per the record of Britannica. We are having more than 4 lakh angiosperm species which are known today, including cultivars, strains, and trains. Obviously, remember, even today, whatever flora is known to us, we are knowing only 40% of the flora. The taxonomists still believe that still 60% of the flora is yet to be discovered, because there are so many remote areas, there are so many remote places, there are so many remote habitats which are comprising the angiosperms, and because of that, all these they have been not included yet. And because of that, it has been once proposed that the angiosperm group should be separated within the plantee, and it should be raised at the level of a separate division. And this level is called as the anthophyta. For example, we know that the kingdom Plantee and kingdom Animalia, they were the two kingdoms which were raised. Below that, it was considered the Anthophyta group and Phanerophyta group. So Phanerophyta will be comprising right from the bacteria to gymnosperms, and the Anthophyta group will be containing only the angiosperms. This was one of the suggestions which was made in the 1990s. Before we go to the proper overview, it's very interesting if we know what is the contribution of India. Unfortunately, the Indian contribution was always based on the economic importance. That also the importance which was related with the human activities. And because of that, this record unfortunately was not available in written form, and no one made efforts to translate this information into English. And because of that, this particular information is still available with us in sporadic form. If at all we want to mention the name of Theophrastus, when we say he was just through 200 to 300 years before Christ. So it is from almost 2,500, 300 years back. But if we consider the Parashar, what we know as the Parashar Muni, he was living in Himalayas, and at that time he has written one book which is known as the Vriksha Ayurveda. Now remember, this Vriksha Ayurveda is the book which has been written where it is known as a Vriksha Samhita of India. And Parashar was existing in India almost 1500 years before Christ. So Even after that, at that time, even Plato and Theophrastus were not existing. They were in the living in jungles. At that time, Parashar Muni has written this Vriksha Samhita or Vriksha Ayurveda. It is one of the important Upanishad of Indian Vedic culture and literature. So this particular Vriksha Ayurveda is very interesting because in that Vriksha Ayurveda, he has given the comparative account of plant morphology. He was knowing about the habitat of the plant. He was knowing about the habit of the plant. He was knowing about the different morphological characters, what he know as an indices of root, stem, and leaf, even inflorescences. And not only that, he has used this for the classification. So he has prepared a classification of his own based on these characters. Very interestingly, the today as a genera, what we know as a genera, he has called them as a ganas. So ganas were the plants which were having a common characters together. And the ganas were having the some families, subgroups, and they were the ones which were used for the economic purposes. Very interestingly, in this Parashara's Vriksha Ayurveda, the details of morphology are also available. And these details of morphology, they are including vegetative characters as well as floral morphology. So at that time, he was knowing and he was capable to dissect the flora, dissect the flower. And he was knowing the floral components. Also, he was knowing about its parts, calyx, corolla, androgen, gynoecium, and accordingly, he has used these characters in the classification system. He was knowing the importance of the number. So he has mentioned 4 petals, 5 petals, 6 petals, stamens, and so on and so forth. He was also knowing about the fusion of the components. So the fusion, syngamy, sympetally, also epipetalous condition, gamopetalous condition, all these characters they have been mentioned. And furthermore, he was also knowing about the importance of the position of the ovary. So he has in his Vriksha Ayurveda described the superior ovary and inferior ovary. So that way the Parashara was very interesting. Obviously, his disciple later on, who was totally devoted to the diseases and their remedies. He was interested in finding the role of plants in human hygiene. And his name was Charak. Actually, Charak was a disciple of Parashar. And Charak wrote what is known as today as the Charak Samhita. Now, both these books, they have been written in Sanskrit. And they are written in the form of shlokas, in Kavita, Kavya. So, Charak was present somewhere about 1320 BC. So almost there is a gap of almost more than 80 years in between. Now the Charak also provided a plant classification, and he provided classification based on the biochemical constituents of the plants. His classification was of the plants based on the biochemical composition of the plants, also based on the uses of the plants on different hygienic components. Obviously, role of the plants and their importance concerned with the human health. And that's why the word Ayu has come. Ayu means life. And from this word Ayu, the Ayush has come. And from this Ayush, another term has come, which we know as Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is nothing but it is a Ved, or it is information, scientific information, which is related with the healthiness of life. Ayu means life. And that's why even we were having such a type of holistic approach almost 2000 years back before Christ. Now, let us come together and study the outline of what the Westerners have said. As far as the classification is concerned, actually the credit has to be given to the earlier Greek philosophers. And this particular Greek philosopher's trend initiates with the Plato. And the Plato had a student, his name was Theophrastus. His name was Theophrastus. And Theophrastus was existing, he was present in 370 to 287 years before Christ. So almost just 200 years back before Christ. So from this place, from this present day, he was present almost 2300 years back. And he was a Greek naturalist because he was studying the nature which was present around that time, at that time. So he was the first who has given a very precise information about the plants which were existing at that time He has written the characters of the plants. He has written the say relations of the plants, and all this information has been written in Greek language, and it is available now. And as it is still existence, the Theophrastus now it is called by the Westerners as a father of botany, because he was the one who separated the plants from animals, and not only separated, he gave the characters why the plants should be separate. So he was the one who firstly classified the plants based on their habitat. So he identified the habitat like herbs, undershrubs, shrubs and trees, even the climbers. Also, he gave the names and description of the plants of more than 500 plants at that time, which were present around him. And for this purpose, he wrote one book. His name was Historia Plantarum. So it is a plant history. And remember, this is the book which is still in existence in Rome, the capital of the Rome, or the capital of Catholic world, Catholic Christians at Rome. This book is still in existence, and people do use this book, which is called the Historia Plantarum. So that's why the Theophrastus was the one, and Theophrastus was the first who has separated the plant kingdom and animal kingdom. Not only that, he was the one who has given the classification of plants, and for soil he has used the word minerals, the physical word. So he classified the plants separately, animals separately, and minerals separately. Minerals in the sense the physical soil separately. Now he had proposed almost 500 names to the plants at that time, and we are still using some of the names. That's these names, they are known as the name of the genera, and we are still using those names like Ducus, Asparagus, Rosa, Punica, Phaseolus, and many others. So still those names are in existence. Now he was the first who pointed out the difference between the dicots and monocots also. So even though he was having his only eyes, his observations were so keen, so precise, that at that time, almost 2000 years back, he has identified the dicots and monocots separately. And also he has further described the plant parts, floral parts, and their insertion pattern. So how these are arranged together, that was also described by this father of botany, Theophrastus. Later on, many people, they tried to contribute, and many of these names, they have been now today used as a name of genera. For example, the Cisalpini, Bauhinia, Asagre, Randy, and many others. All these generic names, now actually they are the names of the scientists, taxonomists at that time. After Theophrastus, which is called as the father of botany, the major contribution in plant classification was made by Carl Linnaeus. Now, Carl Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist. Actually, he was a student of medicine, and he has written the first, what we can call as a treatise of plants, and that's why Linnaeus is called as the father of modern botany, or the father is, he is also called the father of taxonomy, or Linnaeus, and that's why he proposed the first concrete classification system at that time. Linnaeus proposed the classification system in 1753, and his name of the book was Systema Naturae, means a system, a classification of the natural plants. His merit is that he showed the basic unit of natural classification is not an individual but a species. It means at that time he recognized that the classification has to be made of not a single plant but of a single group which is capable to reproduce within itself. So the last unit of reproducible component, it was considered as species, and he has given the classification of that species. And that's why the credit has to be given to the Linnaeus, which is known as the father of taxonomy. So at that time, almost 300 years back, he proposed the classification system with this hierarchy. He has coined these terms: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So this was the hierarchy of classification he has given. He said that the kingdom is the one in which all other components are involved, and then they can be categorized into different phylums. So this was a sort of a, you can say, bucketing component, that keeping the similar characters together and separating the dissimilar characters in another way. So this was the hierarchy which he has proposed. For example, for plants, he classified all the plants, right from the algae to angiosperms. It is 20 classes. Very interestingly, the 19 classes, they were belonging to angiosperms. And he classified the plants considering only one reproductive character. That's why, as this was the sexual character he has used, the lineage was recognized as, or lineage system of classification is recognized as a sexual system of classification, because he was using a sexual component for his mode of classification. Very interestingly, Linnaeus, he studied only the stamens, and based on the stamens, based on the number of stamens, based on the position of the stamens, and based on the correlation of the stamens, the diffusion, he made the classes. So just I am giving an outlook. So the classification was including 20 classes, as I told you. So the class Monandria, Diandria, Triandria, Tetrandria, Pentandria, and so on and so forth, where the stamen number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, likewise. So up to 10, class 10 was Decandria, that is where the stamens are 10. So all belonging to these numbers, they were included in this classification system. Now in the class 12, he called as the Dodecandria. Dodecandria was the class which was containing the stamen number which was 12. Then the class number 12 was Echozandria, where the flowers were having more than 20 stamens. Then class 13 was Polyandria, where the stamen number was much more higher than 20. Then class 14 was Diademia, where there are 4 stamens are present, 2 are long and 2 short. So dynamous condition has been identified as a separate class. Similarly, another group is called the Tetradynamia, where the stamen number is 6, where 2 are long and 4 are short. Sorry, 4 are long and 2 are short. So this is a tetradynamic condition which is present in the family Brassicaceae. It is also present in the family Caparidaceae, and to some extent some families of Scrophulariaceae and Bignoniaceae. They show this tetradynamia condition. Similarly, he wrote one group, class 16, as a Monadelphia, where the stamens are present, where the anthers are separate but the filaments are fused together. So the family Malvaceae, Tiliaceae are placed together. And class 17, Diadelphia, where the stamens are present in 2 groups, 2 bundles. Example is Leguminosae family, where diagonal stamens are present, the family Papilionaceae. And then the class 18 was Polyadelphia, like Rutaceae, Meliaceae, Celastraceae, Nymphaeaceae, and many others, where the many stamens are present in many bundles. Then Syngenetiae, where the stamens are having the anthers which are fused and the filaments are free. And then class 20, Gynandria, and this in Gynandria, the flowers are having fused with the pistils. Now this classification 2021 were subgrouped in between the previous classes. But his last classification was class 24, which was called as a Cryptogamia, and in Cryptogamia he has placed all the remaining plant groups together. So right from the algae to fungi, to bryophytes and pteridophytes, they were placed together. So that's why this was the classification system which was proposed, obviously based on only one character. And because of the only one character, this was called the artificial system of classification. I do know that in SYBSc you have studied this classification system of Linnaeus. Now, when we are talking about the Linnaeus, you can see the way he has presented in the name of a number of stamens, and accordingly he has prepared the classes. The names of classes also give this, so this is sort of a text of what he has presented. Now he published the species plantarum in 1753. And at that time he classified almost more than around 6,000 species which were present around him. See the task. A single man without any manpower, without any instrumentation, by mere observations, he has recorded, described almost 6,000 species which were present around him. And that's why he's called as a father of modern taxonomy. Now that time he also published a Systema Naturae in 1758. So almost 5 years after that, in which he classified almost more than 4,200 species of animals. So this was the kingdom Animalia, and species Plantarum was the kingdom Plantae. The Linnaeus also introduced, as we don't know well, in taxonomy we studied this very well, the concept of binomial nomenclature. Initially, right from the Cisalpini to present day at the time, the people were using the polynamic condition. So they were not knowing how to name the plants. And that's why they're describing the plants in very long and different words using the Greek terminology. And that's why from scientific point of view, it was very difficult to identify and remember the plants. So Linnaeus was the one who, for the sake of convenience, it was actually basically for his sake of convenience, he shortlisted the plants with only 2 names. The first name was called the generic name, which was having a very similar characters together, and the deviations from this character were called as a species, and they were placed separately. So in the binomial nomenclature, the first word is called a generic name or genus, and this generic alphabet is always capital, and the second word is called a species name or species, and this is written in a small case. And do you know well that Linnaeus was the one who has been given the credit of binomial nomenclature which we use today. So this was the beginning of taxonomy. Now this was called as or up to the Linnaeus it was called as a artificial system of classification, because during this period or up to this period they were considering only one important prominent character, and this character was used for the classification. But later on a trend initiated, and this trend initiated with the John Ray in 1813, where he tried to classify the plants using many characters, and that also many characters which are showing the similarities together. So he tried to identify the common plants together, common similar plants together, and try to place them together and try to provide a classification system. And that's why, as this was occurring naturally, this system of classification was known as a natural system of classification. And that's why the natural system of classification is very important. These classifications were termed natural because they rejected the Linnaeus artificial classification system, which was using only one character or limited number of characters. And at the same time, as I told you already that the concept of natural classification is in pre-Darwinian concept. It is totally different than what today we call it as a non-evolutionary theory or pre-Darwinian theory. This was the natural means it was the theory which was proposing the natural assemblage of the plants together. So the Lamarck also said that the species could change through time by passing through the traits acquired by the individual. So it was sort of reaction in between the environment and the plants, or in between environment and species. And so he suggested that the species are never having a common character or fixed characters, but these characters do go on changing. And this changing is important because this is the basis of the evolution. So that is called the Lamarckism. Later on, the Jesu also produced a genera plantarum, in which he started describing the genera, families and classes. And what we are truly studying today, in the outline obviously, is the Bentham Hooker system of classification. The Bentham and Hooker system of classification was produced in 1883. And his title of the 3-volume work was called as a Genera Plantarum. The second volume which was produced, it was called as a Species Plantarum. Now before we go in details, we have to know what are the trends evolutionary trends which have been accepted during this classification. So understanding the relationship as an event of continuous evolution which is linked with the ancestral forms. For example, there are two schools, as I told you. One school is called German school, which initiated with the Eichler, and I told you that Eichler was the one who was suggesting that the simple flower, simple unisexual flower without any perianth lobes, and the male flower containing only the stamen, and female flower which is containing only the carpel. This is the most primitive condition. So the woody apetalous plants are primitive, like Amentiferi group, and they further advanced and increased the complexity. On the contrary, the Besse was the one who provided the another view or approach, and he said that many free appendages and a bisexual flower, this can be treated, or this should be considered as a primitive character. And that's why he suggested that the woody magnolia like plants, they are more primitive, and then from them they started advancing and showed the evolution. But during the course of evolution, again the simplicity was also acquired. And so this evolutionary trend is in towards two ways. It is towards going for the complexity, and secondly, the complexity undergoes a progressive evolution which is leading towards the simplicity. So that was the trend which was proposed by the Besse, and obviously because of that, after Besse, so many people, including Bentham and Hooker and many others, they are believing in this Reinellian trend. So obviously this Reinellian trend which was accepted by the Bentham and Hooker, the same was accepted even later by the Besse, then Cronquist, Taktajan, Thorn and many others. So this Reinellian group is the most famous group today. As per the Bentham and Hooker system of classification is concerned, you have studied this classification system in details last time. That's why I'm not going to give you all the details, because only you are knowing it, you are having your notes with you, but I am going to give you an overview. So George Bentham and Joseph Hooker, the two British taxonomists who were closely associated with the Royal Botanical Garden Kew, they have given a detailed classification of plant kingdom, particularly with the Angiosperms, and both very, very important because they were having a very first-hand information on the external morphology. They gave an outstanding system of classification of phanerogams, that is Gymnosperms and Angiosperms together, in their Genera Plantarum, which was published in 3 volumes in the year 1962 to 1983. Obviously, they called this system of classification as an artificial system of classification. Actually, their system of classification was naturally a phylogenetic system of classification by comparison today, but they themselves called this classification as a natural system of classification because they didn't want to add the concept of Darwin, the phylogeny, in their classification. Because Darwin's concept of phylogeny, it appeared in 1863 onwards. But at that time, this work was almost complete and they have not used this. Now, both described almost more than 97,000 species of flowering plants, and they grouped in different 202 orders. Actually, this number is 200, and there are 2 families which are called the Familia Animalia. That is, their exact position was not known at that time. So 200 plus 2, that becomes 202. The system has the advantage of being the first great natural system of classification, which is very easy to follow in the field. So that's why this Bentham Hooker system of classification is very easy, and even today also, almost half of the world is using their classification system, because this classification system is based on external morphology. So the way you go to the field, you can see the characters and immediately you can identify the plants. So this is a sort of an overview or a diagrammatic chart of plant kingdom. So obviously the plant kingdom is classified into 2 groups, Cryptogamia and Phanerogamia. In Cryptogamia, non-flowering plants, Phanerogamia, flowering plants. The phanerogams, they are classified into 3 subclasses. They are dicotyledony, Gymnospermy and monocotyledony. Remember, the placing of Gymnosperms in between dicot and monocot was a great mistake. And this mistake was rectified by many others now, later on. So they removed this Gymnospermy and placed it before. But at that time, Bentham and Hooker, they have placed it in between. Similarly, the dichotomy was subdivided into three subclasses: polypetally, gamopetally, and monoclamidy. That is, petals are free, petals are fused, and perianth is present. No calyx and corolla. And that's why it is called the monoclamidy. That is, the perianth is present. Whereas the monocots, they were directly having the 7 orders, which they called it as a 7 series. So this is an overview of the classification. Just to give the glimpse, in polypetally, they had the 3 series: thalamiflory, disciflory, and calyciflory. In thalamiflory, ovary superior, disc absent. In disciflory, ovary superior, disc present. And in calyciflory, the ovary is inferior. Similarly, the gamopetally was further classified into inferi, heteromeri, and bicarpellity series. In inferi, the ovary was inferior. In heteromeri, the ovary was superior, but with the many carpels. And in bicarpellity, the ovary was bicarpellary superior. Obviously, these are the monoclamidy, that is in dicot group, where the flowers are where the position was uncertain and they were having the perianth. So curvembry, microvility aquatic, microvility terrestris, microembryi, daphnes, acclamidiospori, unisexuals, and order is another. Even at that time also he was having some problems in placing the families. So like the family Ceratophyllaceae and Salicaceae, they were placed in this order. Similarly, in the monocotyledons also, they were classified into 7 series directly: Microspermi, Epigyne, Coronary, Calycini, Nudiflory, Apocarpi, and Glumaceae. Obviously, Microspermi it means obviously these were the plants which were aquatic and the embryo was too minute. They were the endospermic plants. In Epigyne, ovary was inferior. In Coronary, the ovary was superior, but presence of calyx and corolla was present. In Calycini, the ovary was superior, but calyx and corolla were obviously fused and they were cephaloid. In Nudiflory, the flowers were very small, minute, and that's why they nudiflory. For example, the Typhaceae, Pandanaceae, all these are having the very small flowers. Apocarpi, where the ovules were free. So they are having the 3 ovules or 3 ovaries which are free. So tricarpellary ovary, which is apocarpus and obviously inferior. And in Glumaceae, the ovary is superior and they are fused together. So when we are talking about this classification of Bentham Hooker, what are the merits? Because we have studied the classification system of the Bentham Hooker last time in details. You are having all the data with you. One of the most valuable contribution of this work is the description of the taxa at all the levels. Both were taxonomists, and that's why they have written the description of each and every plant up to the minute details. Even he has taken the measurements. He has taken the measurements of the size of the bracts, size of the calyx, size of the corolla. Even he has mentioned the colors. Even he has written the size of the leaves. And that's why it is more precise, more pinpointed, and more accurate. The description was too accurate, and it was very easy to identify plant species up to family level. So even he has prepared the groups in such a distinct way that even a small amateur botanist can also identify this. And that's why this family was this particular system of classification was very popular, very famous, and it is ready to use. So because the description were based on the direct observations by the authors, this became the model of accuracy. So even today, this work is treated as a standard work. Now this system is having the advantage that they have placed the order Renales at the beginning of the system. And today the world has accepted this, that Renales group is the most primitive group among the Angiosperms. And that's why, fortunately, this Bentham Hooker, they have placed them at the beginning of the dicot phylogeny, that is in group series Thalamiflory. Obviously, the placement of accords before the monocots is also accepted. That means the Bentham Hooker accepted that monocots are more advanced than dicots. And because of that, these are obviously there are so many merits of this classification system. In SYBC's class, you might have written this all details. These are some of the few which I have mentioned. Now let's go for the demerits or limitations. Now the major limitation, as I told you, that they place the gymnosperms in between the angiosperms, that is in between the dicots and monocots. That was a major mistake. And obviously they could not rectify this. And all the taxonomists later they accepted that this was a serious mistake they have made. Now the introduction of monoclamidae is again another drawback. That is a monoclamidae, a new class which was created within the dicot. This was not accepted at all by many other workers. On the contrary, all the members of this monoclamidae, they were included or they were added either in the polypetal or gametophyte. So creation of a monoclamidae is also a drawback, artificial sign, as this group is containing both advanced as well as primitive members together. Among the monocot, Orchidaceae is placed at the beginning, which is again a wrong character, because Orchidaceae is the most advanced family of monocots. And that's why Orchidaceae should be placed somewhere at the later position, but unfortunately in this system of classification they have placed at the beginning with all its advanced characters. The division of the monocot is based on the position of the ovary and character of the perianth. Only these two characters are considered. And that's why this has created a lot of confusion in classifying the monocots. Because there are several closely related members and families or groups, they are placed elsewhere and they have been separated. So because of these merits and demerits, even though, remember, in 19th century and in 20th century, the Britishers were ruling half of the world. As both these botanists, Bentham and Hooker, they were the British taxonomists. Their system of classification was accepted by half of the world, where the Britishers were ruling. Similarly, there is another trend which came from the Germany. So Engler and Prantl system of classification is a system of classification which was accepted by the communist world, but remaining half of the world. So Adolf Engler and Karl Prantl, the both German botanists, they prepared a 23-volume monumental work, by Naturalism Plants and Familien. That is the natural plant families. Now remember, the contribution of Engler and Prantl is much more higher and greater than Bentham Hooker. Because Bentham and Hooker has given the classification system only for the angiosperms. Whereas Engler and Prantl have given the classification system for all the plant kingdom, right from the algae to angiosperms. And the name was called as the natural plant families. They classified algae to angiosperms. Also, they tried to arrange the plants using the phylogenetic system of classification because they accepted the Darwin's concept. And that's why this is the first true phylogenetic system of classification. Obviously, we have studied this Engler and Prantl system of classification also last time. So we'll be going for the overview again. Now, in Engler and Prantl system of classification, there were 303 families. So number of families was much more higher because of the splitting of larger families. So this is an outline of the total classification where the plants are classified. The division 1 to 12, they are bacteria to pteridophytes, and the division 13 is known as the embryophyta siphonogama. So plants which are having the embryos, that is seeds, and they are having the vessels or tracheids. Siphonogama means they are having the siphon, that is vessels, vascular tissue. Now this siphonogama, embryophyta siphonogama, generally what we know as the phenologams today, they are further classified into gymnosperms and angiosperms. So obviously gymnosperms are placed before the angiosperms. So obviously angiosperms further they are classified into monocots and dicots. Again, this was the mistake by Engler and Prantl, where they placed the monocots before the dicots. And they felt that the monocots are more primitive than the dicots. Obviously, when they classified the dicots were classified into two subclasses, archiclamidae and metaclamidae. Archi means the perianth lobes are free. They are called the archiclamidae, and meta means fused, where the perianth lobes they are fused together. Archiclamidae was much more larger. It was having almost 33 orders and 206 families, whereas metaclamidae had 11 orders and 52 families. Like in monocots, it had 11 orders and 45 families, whereas in Bentham Hooker system of classification, monocotyledons, they were having only 7 series. This is sort of a broad distribution the way we would like it in the form of dichotomous chart. Only the characters I have written that Corolla is polypetalous, Perianth is single or double, and it includes 33 orders and 201 families together. Whereas in Corolla, obviously it is fused, the Perianth always in two walls, and it is having almost 57 families. Now, as far as the Engler and Prantl is concerned, definitely this was having an advantage at that time. So it's a phylogenetic system because it was accepting the phylogenetic trend, evolutionary trend, and accordingly the plant groups were arranged, mostly following these evolutionary trends. So obviously what they called as a primitive group, they were placed at the beginning, and they were followed by the advanced groups. Now this system deals with all groups of plant kingdom, that is advantage. Bacteria, algae, fungi, bryophytes, pteridophyta, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. The system provides a modern taxonomic keys for the identification of each group of the plants. So this group was using the diversified characters, many characters together, not a single character. And that's why it is more appropriate, it is more natural. Now, the gymnosperms were treated as a separate group. Its position before the angiosperms is very correct and is in perfect accordance with the modern concept of evolution. Also, the position of Asteraceae, that is Compositae, as the last family of dicot is very logical and accurate because of the highest evolved characters or trend which has been exhibited by this family. The position of Archaidaceae at the end of monocots is also very interesting and accurate as it's most advanced family of monocots. However, the modern trend suggests that the family Gramineae should be treated as the most advanced family because the spread of the Gramineae is much more higher in different habitats and which is cosmopolitan over the Archaidaceae, which is restricted only to the old world. Now, the anatomical data, they were taken into consideration even by the Engler and Prantl, where they have not been taken into consideration by the Bentham Hooker.